Okay, so tonight, thanks very much. We're joined by Brian Cuthbert, and we're going to be talking about player development and putting the parts together. So thanks very much, Brian. You might just give us a quick rundown on your own background. I know most people are familiar with you, but from your own perspective.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me on. I suppose I've seen some of the other webinars over the last couple of weeks, and I'm delighted to get an opportunity to speak about this topic. I suppose, look, I've been involved in my club all my life with Bishopstown. I'm chairman the last 3 years in the club. I suppose I've been basically based in the community big time, in the fact that I'm teaching in the local boys primary school for the last 24 years. I've been principal for the last 11 or 12 years, maybe 13 years. And at the same time, when I stopped playing with the club, I went and I started coaching a lot of teams. I probably was coaching a lot of teams before that anyway, underage teams and that. So I've done the adult team in the club maybe for 4 or 5 years. I've done underage teams, minor teams. Last year I was stuck with our hurlers or senior hurlers. And I suppose I was involved with Cork at different grades, different stages. The minor team in 2010-11. Even before that as a selector with Connor in 13, and I was involved with the senior team as manager in 14 and 15. I came out at the back of that. I don't know what way you'd call it. I came out the back of it anyway, and decided, with a bit of prodding from Fiona Chambers in UCC, I went off and I did a PhD for 2 or 3 years, 3 years actually, in talent development in the academies and Gaelic games, and that's probably given me a total different outlook and total different perspective on what player development is about, and that's why I'm delighted tonight to get the opportunity to talk about it.
Very good. So tonight we'll go through. You might go through that there. What we're going to summarize. What we're going to go through tonight.
I suppose at the get-go, people need to know what they're going to be talking about. What we're going to be talking about. So, first part of the presentation is just about player development in general and why it is so complex and so difficult to get right. And then I'll talk briefly about player development in the GAA up to now, what actually is going on the ground. And then I'll discuss a view, and this is the interesting part for me, a view of what player development in the GAA could look like in the future. And finally, then I'll do a worked example at nursery level at what this could look like. So when you finish the presentation, hopefully you'll have a very good idea in terms of the direction the GAA is going, because I suppose I forgot to say the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been stuck. I don't mean to use the word stuck, but I've been involved with a committee at national level that looked at the academies and player development in general under the chairmanship of Mick Dempsey, who, by the way, is an absolute brilliant person and an unbelievable mentor and a guy that you'd learn a lot of. But being involved in that the last 2 years, so player development is kind of where I'm at. And I'm kind of stuck in a big project at the moment with the GAA, trying to move player development forward. So this presentation is a bit of a precursor to what could happen, but it's a perspective of mine, not the GAA's. So it's not really an absolute insight to what it actually will be.
Okay, very good. So before we go, we spoke about it already, but the Talent and Player Development Academy Review Committee, or whatever it was called, I suppose just so that people are aware, it wasn't just development squads, talent academies. It was all encompassing of the underage structures within.
I think when I started off, Colin, John Horan had the idea that it would be about academies, but as soon as we got into it, it went completely into the full realm of player development, club, school, inter-county squads, county teams, from up to the ages maybe 17, 18. And so I think we need to take the Talent Academy piece out of that report's heading and look at it much more around player development.
Okay, very good. So the complexity of player development. nature versus nurture.
Yeah, even the title of the slide could be off-putting for some people, but look, we'll keep it very, very simple. I suppose just picture yourself as the coach in your club or school or county, whatever you're at. And sometimes you come across players you think are just born brilliant. And other times you come across players who work very, very hard and become brilliant. I suppose what I'm looking at is that, there's a massive debate, and has been for many, many years in research, whether, there's such things as child prodigy, or, whether somebody has to get a certain amount of hours of training before they're really, really good. But I suppose the analogy I'm going to use are those three buckets. So if the buckets are natural talent, and that's what we're born with, so the biggest bucket obviously was born with the most natural talent, and similarly the other two buckets born with less. It's the environment that fills the bucket up. So if the environment only fills your bucket half full and fills the other bucket fully, then you're in a situation where the person with the full bucket will nearly have a better outcome than the person born with all that talent. So I suppose the first point I'd like to make is, despite the nature and nurture debate in the research, ultimately the most controllable facet we have is the environment. And people who are lucky to be born with a certain amount of I suppose, physical genetics in a very, very good environment will end up in a much better place with somebody born with wonderful genetics, but in a very poor environment. So that's the first piece. And we need to get that central to what we do, because it fits into later in the presentation when we get into what the GAA does. Okay. So the second piece of that then is deliberate practice and specialization. And I've said this to you before, Colm, is that there's another belief that if we practice for an inordinate amount of time, we ultimately will be very, very, very good. Well, there's a glass ceiling there. So genetically, again, and environmentally, with all the practice in the world, some people are never going to be superstars in All-Ireland final on Sunday in September, whereas, you know, other people, the reaction is different. For Gaelic Games, we don't know actually how much practice we need to be good, right? But at the same time, we do know that the often 10,000 hour rule doesn't apply to us. It applies to things like chess and gymnastics, but not to Gaelic Games. So this idea that people need to specialise when they're very, very young to be very good at football or hurling or ladies football or camogie, that doesn't make any sense in the research. It doesn't add up. You know, I suppose I'm not a football snob or anything like that, but this idea that hurling in particular needs, you know, just total concentration and nothing else, I think that's a flawed perspective. And I think, you know, it's very, very important that children are exposed to a wide variety of games for as long as possible. They'll make a decision in the end, but that doesn't have to come till they're 15 or 16 maybe, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose just from worldwide sports, now thinking of American football draft and the NBA and stuff like that, all the players at the top level of that are all multi-sport youth players.
Yeah.
And maybe at 15, 16, they might start specialising. But before that, a wide array of skills through a wide array of sports.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get fixated with the technical aspect of the game and the skills of the game. And there's a difference between technique and skill. Technique is actually the practice of being able to hit the ball. Say the skill is actually doing it at the right time in the right place, you know, under pressure in a game. Mm-hmm. But you know, I think I put up a stat before in another presentation a couple of years ago. One of the All-Ireland finals, Henry Shefflin only had, I think, 9 or 10 touches of the ball, but he was man of the match. Yeah. So if that works out, that you only have the ball for, you know, 1% of the game, what are you doing for the other 99%? So it's learning the game is a crucial piece here. I'm trying to make that point. The next piece then is very, very crucial as well. Is instead of deliberate practice, there's a move in the research to deliberate play, which focuses usually on you know, children playing with their friends, playing I call them in the back garden. And I suppose in my vintage and before me and a bit after me, everybody played in the garden, on the road. Whatever was on and the television was mirrored on the road, like Wimbledon, golf, you know, the RDS, hopping over milk crates, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all of that was adding to our sense of skills in terms of gross motor and fine motor, but that's lost. And the fact that family dynamics now are much smaller, you don't have a lot of brothers, a lot of sisters in most houses, so you don't have these games that were played night and day in the back garden or the front garden. That's a huge problem. So research is saying that, you know, we need to expose children to actually almost managing their own play. So when we go to the club, I can see it myself, is when the coach turns up, and if there's guys who are there early, we actually spoil their play because we start the training. So and so much so that when the training finishes, they actually go on and play after training and play their own games again. So that's the bit that we need to be very cognizant of, the fact that, you know, they need up to a certain age a sense of managing their own fun, managing their own play, and I suppose you referred to it there in an earlier conversation with me as free play.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing, but managed by themselves. We actually tried it one night, actually, under 8, under 9 in my own club, where we actually let them run the session themselves. Now you might say this is ludicrous when they're so small, but you'd be amazed that they can manage it. So we stood back, we went off to the side of the pitch, and we said, okay, you can do whatever. Now these guys have been training since they've been 5 or 6, and do whatever. And they actually ran their own games, ran their own teams, ran their own session for as long as we wanted it.
Yeah.
So it is quite interesting to watch it.
Yeah, like I always use the example there that if we're doing a traditional coaching course, let's say in Bishopstown, and you're inside in the meeting room or something with all the parents, and if we all brought up the kids and threw them outside,
Yeah.
they'd play something, whether they're playing crossbar challenge or just trying to kick the ball over the bar for the smaller kids, or playing 3-on-3 or 4-on-4 for the oldest. That's the kind of free, deliberate play that's what you're kind of talking about.
Yeah, and they'll have to actually end up refereeing the game themselves, their own rules, that there's a cultural understanding that this is how it looks. So I think that's a crucial piece. The next piece that we need to be very careful of and very, very mindful of is the role of maturation. And this RA maturation obviously is biological. Mm-hmm. So some children obviously are born much bigger than others. So when we're playing under 11, under 12, under 13, which is a chronological age competition, obviously, biology doesn't come into it. So I have, I look back and I think of loads of different players I've seen over the years who were much bigger than everyone else, and it could just mill through people. And really, when it came to it, at the end of the day, by the time everybody caught up in size, it, that player wasn't obviously as effective anymore. So maturation is a key thing that we need to think of. And sometimes you might be wise to actually push people who are biologically bigger up into older age groups to actually train with the older age group for a while, so that the focus can be on skill development instead of just domination. RE is something similar, so relative age effect. So we need to be very careful of this also, that when we are picking teams, and maybe not at club level, but certainly at school level and academy level, that we don't again focus on maturation and the people born in the first quartile of the year. So the research is saying to us again that at underage level, there's a bias towards people born in the first quartile. But the new research has shown us that in elite teams, it's the guys in the last quartile who actually end up being the elite players. Okay. So you have to ask yourself the question, why does this happen? So it happens because over time, these people have got many, many knockbacks. They become more resilient. And when it comes to having the toolbox to actually play at an elite level, they've managed to develop a lot of these things through kickbacks and fighting and skirmishing to get there, that the people who were kind of, I suppose, mollycoddle along and through a nice, lovely approach, just didn't develop. So that's another crucial piece. And then,
can I just ask you one pair, sorry, Brian, just on the maturation there, you mentioned about players, you might put the bigger, stronger, let's say under 12 up training with the under 13s. Yeah. What's the question, I know there's a bunch of coaches probably ask the same question, is how often should we encourage that? Or if the player is good enough to play under 13, should we just send them up there and leave them there?
Yeah.
Because at least examples in your own club of what, like, how do you deal with that kind of, I suppose, the parent who might be a bit, like, he's too good for the under 12s, he should be up there playing with them. Like, how would you deal with that, or have you any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful, right? Because there's a dual purpose there. Sometimes the manager of the team above wants the better players of the team under, obviously, right? To buttress up his team and make them better so that they win a competition. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is completely individualistic column, in the fact of this is what's best for this player right now, not what's best for the team a year above him.
Yeah.
So for this player, it would be best that he goes up training with this team for some time. That doesn't mean that he plays the matches, right?
Yeah.
So it's slightly different.
So do you sporadic up there, maybe go up for back down in 3 weeks time, might go up again.
Absolutely. And I would look at it this way. I would say there's no harm just saying in a club like ours now, we'd have teens on every age, so 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever. So, and most clubs do, I would presume, but there's no harm in the 12s, 13s and 14s training at the same time.
Okay.
And using 2 pitches and actually rotating people around, where the children know nothing about why am I going up or down, but you can actually be very smart and clever that way.
And just on the way fellas go up, obviously for the fellas, let's say, that are on the wrong end of the relative age effect, for them to go down to expose probably Might be something.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. So you have two ends of the scale, up and down, but we can't even use those words up and down. It's just a general club approach.
Yeah.
I suppose the big piece there where really floats my fancy is the role of the environment. If that's the most controllable piece, then, how do we get that right? And within that environment, you have psychosocial skills. So I'm going to get into that in the next slide there.
Okay.
So again, in terms of us in the GAA, we have to look at the role of the environment in player development. And to be honest about it, and I get into it in a minute, from research I did and research of the Player Development Review Committee, you can see that there's a lot of dysfunction within the environment because we have so many teams, so many coaches, we have a dual sport, hurling and football going at the same time. You have a lot of barriers to development. So if we're going to be smart, and if a club is going to be smart or a county is going to be smart, they're going to actually promote these 6 or 7 things here, 6 things actually. So training groups that are supportive, which is crucial in the fact of you're going to have your group, rather than people vying for positions, they're actually, supporting each other in terms of development. And now that's tricky enough because at club level, it doesn't really happen. Most people play it all of the time. But at schools level and inter-county level, that is a very, very crucial component, that the whole environment is around getting better and, people really hoping that everyone else does well as themselves. Now, that might sound a bit of airy-fairy. That's a crucial piece in terms of getting the environment right. Role models are another one. I remember being up in Tyrone, in Garvaghey, in their training centre, and I was interviewing a young fellow who was with the under-20s, and he'd been to Garvaghey since he was 14. And he said to me, I love training here. And he said, when I was very young, we all used to be fed after training, and we'd come in here, and the kind of a restaurant, kind of a cafeteria out in a hall. And he said all the training would finish at the same time. And he said, Sean Kavanagh, he didn't know me. Obviously I knew him. He said, he used to come and sit next to me of a night, and he got chatting to me. And then the next night we were in training, he sat next to me again. And he said, over 5 or 6 or 7 weeks, he learned more off Sean Kavanagh in those chats after training. And he was only 15, 16. And so here's the effect of a role model. So we need to create environments where we can have these role models operating all the time. And I know in every single club, there are role models on the adult teams for the younger players. And it's a question of clubs being smart. How are they going to use these to actually promote development? The other one we've touched on already is diversification. So it's very crucial that we don't punish people for playing other sports, or we should be big enough in the GAA to say, yeah, if you're playing soccer or if you're playing rugby or tennis or athletics, whatever it is, once you give us some level of commitment, whatever that is decided in the club, we'd actually promote and support your development in terms of getting opportunity to play other things. I'm not talking about somebody turning up once every 5 or 6 weeks just to play GAA. I'm talking about you as a coach being open to the fact that children will play other sports and not close to it. And deciding with your club or your committees what is a level of commitment that you're willing to accept up to a certain point. Now, obviously, you get to a stage where people specialize. So at 16 or 17 or 15 or 16, you'd like to think that people are going to, be committed to the club. And if they're going to play GAA, that they're committed to playing hurling and football, or hurling or football, whatever it may be. But certainly from the age of 5 and 6 up to 14 or 15, before I would be absolutely livid for somebody heading off playing soccer, when we had an activity. But I suppose now I'd be a bit more understanding.
But we are. Would you say that GAA coaches, I know that, like you said, they'd be livid that child has gone away doing something else. Would you say we're getting a little bit better at it, or do we accommodate the good fella and not accommodate the poor fella? As I said, if we've got a fella who's let's say on Cork Kennedy Cup, and he's a Cork under 14 hurler and a Cork under 14 footballer, and we'll allow him do that. But if there's a weaker child in, mightn't be as good at that or as good at the sports, are we treating some kids differently because they are a better player or perceived?
No, I don't think so. What I would be saying, if the commitment isn't good enough or big enough from players who play a lot of sports, then you can't punish a boy who's going to be there all the time with you. So I think there's a fine line there and a fine balance. And I suppose if you're very clear in terms of policy with parents of this is what we expect from our players, and if somebody is going to deliver that for you, then you can't say, oh, you know, I'm still not going to play you even though you did what I asked you to do.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, if a player is a weaker player at a certain age and he's there all the time, I think he deserves to be rewarded as well.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes down to the man-child management and getting it right.
Clear lines of communication is very important in that environment.
Communication is key there.
Okay.
Integration of efforts is everybody in the club coming together. So, you know, again, I would have seen people at various different contexts. You know, I'm the under 14 manager, somebody else is the under 13 manager. I actually don't want him to win because the glory is off me. So I'm actually going to try and almost stymie his efforts, or the other way around. Now, that might sound ridiculous, but that's actually the fact of what actually happens.
Yeah.
So if the club is a club that can actually integrate efforts between everybody, and then it goes further than that. So you've got players who are playing at schools level and academy level as well in terms of the very good players. So you have to integrate efforts between club, teacher in the school, and county coach. That's another day's argument, but getting that right is quite difficult as well. So if we can't even get the piece in our own club right, how hard is it to get the next big piece right if players are talented? Right. Then another one, long-term perspective. GB Hockey has a great slogan when they say keep the end in mind. So we absolutely have to keep the end in mind. You never know at 12 or 13 or 14 where a player is going to be when they're 24, 25, or how good they could actually be. So don't make decisions on people when they're that young. It's a case of an environment that allows people just to progress at their pace. I've seen loads of players, I'm sure you have as well, Colm, who have, you know, passed people out, who have come from out of the blue onto intercounty teams, who have really, really blossomed when their body actually develops. So I think, you know, this is a crucial piece long term. And the last one then, it's a big issue for us as organisation core. That is, I suppose, direction from Croke Park, direction from provincial bodies, direction from county body in terms of organisation. So we have a situation in the country where people are doing different things at different times. We have situations within our own county where people are playing different codes at different times. We have situations where matches are all over the place and people are changing matches and moving matches. So you're never going to get development per se if you have a situation where the organisation core is off. So I think there's huge work to be done in the GAA across the whole country and within our own county, obviously. And I think steps are, to be fair, being made on that front in terms of trying to get the fixtures making in the games program, trying to get that right. But clubs have to play their part there as well. You know, clubs can't be calling games off if they're missing some guy who's gone away playing with the soccer team. You know, that's where we're getting this wrong. Yeah. So I think getting those right, you get the environment right. You get the environment right, you get a lot of development right. So that's just a broad perspective of what a developmental environment could look like.
Yeah, very good. Before we move on from this one, Brian, just role models. Have you any suggestions for clubs? Like, as you said, you gave the Sean Cavan an example there that, like, every club coach and every mentor we meet at workshops and courses, they ask, we want to get more of the adult players involved. No, conscious that the adult player is probably down the pitch 3 nights a week, probably in a gym or doing some other thing 2 nights a week, that his time is very limited. Is there any things that you've done in your own club that you might have seen to, let's say, make that link a little bit better?
Yeah, I think first of all, the adult players now are putting, especially, well, same in every club, but if you have a dual senior club and you have players who are playing both sports, we have a lot of, they're actually out an awful lot in terms of matches and training. But at the same time, we'd have guys who are usually committed to the club and usually committed to the underage as well. So we would have a lot of them. We try to put players with teams, but then that doesn't always work because of other commitments, i.e. their own games. But one of the things that we've done, and we're going to do again, is that we'd have a street league, say, all right? So we'd actually call the team, you know, Jamie O'Sullivan, or call the team Ken O'Halloran, or call the team Noel O'Donovan, or call the team Patrick Cronin. So it's their team. So they manage the team with the help of the other mentors. And it actually is quite fun. And ends up being very, very, very tight in terms of interaction between these senior players and our small kids.
Very good. And like just I suppose with something like that, if you're doing that on the same night of their training, so it's just a case of the player coming
Yeah.
down maybe 45 minutes earlier than he normally would, that makes it more accessible rather than coming down a different night in the week. But no, that's really good idea.
Again,
Really
go
good.
back to organizational curriculum. Everything has to be made simple.
Okay. Very good. Very good. So what's happening up to now?
I suppose touching on some of the stuff I've spoken about, what we've seen around the country and what I've seen myself and what probably everyone else on this call has seen, development completely, it depends on who's in charge, right? So if you're born in 2007 and you happen to have some guy who was born in 2007 in the club and his dad is a good coach, then invariably your team might have a good innings for the next 10 years while that man takes the team and takes his son's team and they do very well and everything works out great. If you're born in 2008 and you have Mr. Murphy training the team who hasn't really played, he has very little experience of coaching, isn't a great person with children, but he's the coach because we have nobody else. Then, you know, even very good players and mediocre players and weaker players, they're not getting an equal slice off the cake, right? Mm-hmm. So clubs, I suppose, are at the behest of who they can get to train the team. But I think we need to move beyond that. I've already mentioned dysfunction, and there's huge dysfunction in the country really regarding the interaction in lots of cases between coaches in different contexts. So again, I speak about the club, the school, and the county. There was a man who told me one time that he was outside his front door at 10:30 at night time before a Harty game and trying to organise 3 fixtures that were coming in 3 days between the Cork Miners, the school, and his club under 21s. And ultimately, the man looked around and he saw his son looking out the window at him through the blinds. And he said he never felt so small in his life that he couldn't fix this problem for him. And he went back in the door and his son asked him, well, Dad, what's going to happen? He says, I don't know. And the man said to me that even his wife was getting cross with him that he didn't fix this. So this level of dysfunction is not fair. And I think for people who are GA complete people, you kind of get used to it and you say that's just the way it is. But I don't think that's good enough anymore. Yeah. So I think that needs to change. And I think you see a lot of good practices in places in some counties and in some clubs who get this right and who manage players properly and empower players to make decisions that people are willing to accept. I think that's where this presentation is going. Trying to get a situation where we can empower our players to make good decisions, informed decisions, and the fact we don't own them, they're not ours, and we have to, players have to be spread around. And I think getting that right, there's a bit of work there. I think another thing as well is a lot of people are asking for direction, like they're asking 5 under 12 team, what should I be doing with them? Or 5 under 13 team, what should I be doing with them? Or the one that people lots of times come to me and say, the team is very, very good now, but I think if I give them another extra bit, they're going to, we could have a right chance of winning the 13 championship or whatever. I think there's a lack of direction there, but I'll get into that in a minute. There's a big debate in my head whether we should provide loads of direction or provide an approach. And I'm probably leaning towards providing an approach where we can actually develop creativity, develop problem solving, develop an adaptable way to work with teams depending on what's in front of you. Because if we become very prescriptive, then things, are taught out of context. And I make a simple analogy, what's done, just say in Cork with a hurling team at under 14 might be very different to what's done with a hurling team in Sligo or Leitrim at under 14. So a generic script doesn't work. Mm-hmm. I think also looking at it, just observing, I think a lot of the practices that we would see are built on experiences that players have had themselves 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's just like anything. And I kind of use this analogy all the time, Colm, is that when you're small, you might say when your mom or dad are getting cross with you, Jesus, when I'm big or when I'm married, I'm never going to talk like that. I'm never going to say those words. And suddenly, 30 years later, you say something out of your mouth to one of your kids and you say, Christ, I promised myself I'd never say that, but that's what my mother or my father would have said. We coach the exact same way and we teach the exact same way. So the learned experiences that we've had, we actually throw them back out again because we have no choice but. And I think that that's slightly dangerous. And I still see people, anywhere I go, I try and watch training, and I still see people sending kids off on laps at the start of training, still sending fellas who are messing off on laps, this kind of stuff. It hasn't changed. And I suppose the last bit is there's limited focus on the person or the individual, and the environment. There's a complete focus on the X's and O's, as I call them. So the complete focus is on drills, games, stuff you can get off your phone, stuff you get off the laptop, loads and loads of different information is everywhere, knowledge is everywhere. That's the easy part. But the soft skills part, dealing with people, developing personal assets in players, developing the environment to make it functionable, that's not happening. And I think that's where we need to get to. So that's what the rest of this presentation is probably going to be.
Right, okay, yeah. So I was going to say, if just elaborate on the last bit, as in, like, for coaching, for a lot of people, it's the easy part. Let's say I can give you something, I can give you a bunch of exercises or activities and that'll get you to 60% of it. But the last 40% for the coach, like as I said, the dealing with the personal side and stuff like that, like, do they need some skills to that, or how can we help every single coach with that? Or is it possible? So
I think it is, and I hope that this presentation actually gives us a direction on that.
Okay.
In terms of what way the GAA could go. And just open up the next one there, Colin.
Yep.
Okay. So the GAA have launched about 2 years ago this idea of, you see it there, we all belong, right? So the question is, do we really all belong? Is our organization or association, is it actually, creating environments where we all belong, or is it creating environments where the best players belong? I think, being honest about it, I'm in a position where my perspective is the better players are catered for better than the normal club players and the normal Joe Soaps. So really, if we were all to belong, we have to do something different. And that's what I'm coming hard with, is I'm trying to develop a different approach. And I suppose the approach, you could call it holistic, right? And simply people and players at the same time. And again, people run a mile from this and they get very angsty and say, well, that's really only very, it's very sugary and it's very cloudy. But I think we need to break this down. And I think what you're trying to do, if I put it in a simple sense, you're trying to develop, I call them assets, or the research might call them assets. You're trying to develop assets in players through quality relationships in the environment that we spoke about, and through quality coaching that will stand to them for their whole life. So if the GAA is about all of us belonging, then our main aim should be sustaining involvement and engagement in the GAA for our whole lives. That's what we should be about. And I think with the approach we have now, which I call the X's and O's, that's a million miles away from what I'm proposing. Okay. And I think if you think about it this way, we've all coached teams, all right? And some of the teams I've coached, young fellas now, are in their 30s. And I suppose the test for me is, if I'm walking down the road in Bishopstown or Patrick Street or wherever, if somebody's on the other side of the road and wants to come across the road to talk to me, and I haven't seen him in 10 or 15 years as a young fella, that's a sign that I've left my mark on him. And it's nothing about technical ability. It's nothing about tactical ability or team play or the psychological stuff and the 3 T's and 3 P's. It's nothing about that. It's completely about making people feel a certain way and making people develop, or helping people and supporting people develop in a certain way. So that's my test. I call it the cross the road test. If you fail the cross the road test, and it's that simple, if you fail the cross the road test, then you haven't been coaching properly.
Once he's coming over to say something nice to you.
Yeah, once he's coming over to say something. There's plenty of people, when I walk down Bar to see, they've said plenty of things to me that aren't nice. But I think with players, if they cross the road and want to talk to you, then you've done a good job. But how do you win the cross the road test is what the next piece is about.
Okay. So a framework to develop or to support development and to keep the end in mind.
Yeah, this framework that you can see on the screen, I don't know how many of our coaches on the call tonight have seen this before. You certainly probably have seen it 4 or 5 times at this stage, Colin, or more. Mm-hmm. So out of the player review document, this framework was proposed because prior to this, we had a framework in the GAA that was called Child, Youth, Adult, which was perfectly fine at the time. It was developed, but now I think there was a desire and a need for a more nuanced approach to player development. So if we imagine that this framework here is a scaffold that sits on top, so it's the guiding map. So it tells us that the big blue circle in the middle is the club, so that level of engagement for life. The small blue circle at the bottom is the nursery section and the underage section in your club, and the key pieces are the transition pieces where the intersections happen in the circle. So getting the player to go from 12 to 13, and then from 17, 18 on to the adult club, they're the difficult pieces. And then over to the right, people get to experience the talent space, the T1, 2, 3, and 4, and they can move through that, and sometimes they don't move on and they go back into the blue space. And then 1% of the players go up where Stephen Cluxton is, up in the yellow space. So it was decided that it's borrowed from research again. So it's decided that from here on in, we want to be able to tell people, and populate a framework like this with an approach, so that we know that best practice, and I'm borrowing a phrase here, best practice becomes common practice at the appropriate stage. So we've got 8 sub-stages or 8 sub-phases within the framework. So what we're trying to do is ensure that at each of those phases or each of those stages, best practice happens. But best practice is simply a lot more, as I say, than the X's and O's. All right? So keep in your head that this is the scaffold. This is the piece that tells us the player's on a journey. So me as the coach, I fit into this journey and I support the journey. Along that journey, I operate a certain way, and the framework will guide me in terms of how I should operate.
You might just quickly elaborate on T1. What age profile are we talking?
Yeah, normally, 13, 14 people go into regional squads there.
Yeah.
In the past, they were going into county squads, and I'm delighted to see in Cork. I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, that we have up to 8 regional squads in hurling football.
8 at 14, 8 in hurling, 8
at 14,
football. Yeah.
And then at T1, obviously, that T1 and T2 space there, it's very important to understand that what you're trying to do in that space is not identify talent, but you're actually trying to give children a chance to verify themselves as having potential. And ultimately, T3 will be the first stage that you really will be saying, here are the talented guys. So T3 is, at the moment, is your under 17 competition.
Okay.
So that T3 space at the moment is an All-Ireland Championship. I think the GAA in time would like it to be a developmental competition. Mm-hmm. And the first All-Ireland Championship would be maybe under 20 or under 19 or whatever it's going to be. Okay. All right?
Yeah, so T4.
We keep this in our head that this is our guiding light. Here, this framework is in front of us. This guides our direction. All right?
Okay. So focus areas.
Yeah, so within the framework is now good as a diagram on its own. So within the framework, you have 3 focus areas. So in the center, you have the player surrounded by his environment, and on the outside, you have the game. All right? So what we're trying to suggest is that if we can get people developing attributes in the player in an appropriate environment, supported by proper practice around the game, we'll actually develop a sustained and engaged, career within playing Gaelic games. So think of your framework again, and this circle repeating itself 8 different times if you start at nursery and you end up being in Crow Park with the Cork team. All right, so 8 different times the circle reappears. You move on there, Colin.
Yep.
So what are we trying to develop? Okay, so again, the fixation was on drills, fixation was on skills, tactics, and I suppose again this isn't a GAA gospel. This is me. So I'm moving away from that completely, and I'm looking at attributes or assets. So the first one is a love of the game. So without that, nothing functions. The next piece is learning to commit. Again, that's around dedicating yourself to sport, and ultimately, hopefully, because the experience is so positive and so good, it's Gaelic games that you commit to. The next piece, learn to be resilient. So we learn all the time about children lacking resilience. If anything, I think the last couple of weeks have shown me children are loaded with resilience.
It seems to be a kind of a cheap comment that kids these days don't have resilience. And it's something that's kind of thrown out at, I suppose, younger generations a lot of the time, about resilience. But like, as I said, your principle, you're dealing with 5 to 12-year-olds daily, and it's not.
No, I see. being honest about it, not just in school, but we all see this in society. The people at fault here are my generation, our generation, are the people who are dropping and collecting them, mollycoddling them, helicopter parenting them.
Mm-hmm.
We're denying them opportunities. Whereas I'm seeing children who are extremely resilient, extremely powerful, extremely adaptable. They're all that. And I think the GAA needs to actually tap into that better, and over that 10, 15 years of development, actually develop that raw material of resilience that's in us all. I think that's a crucial piece in terms of committing to if you take the second attribute there, committing. Without resilience, the commitment and the dedication will wane. So they all fit into each other. The next one then, learning to improve. Again, your focus is on getting better. It's not on winning. It's not on getting on an under 12 team. It's almost individual. It's about me getting better at what it takes to play the game. And that's a mile away from where we are at the moment. The next piece is crucial, taking responsibility. So even though we're playing a team sport, even at a young age, you have to take responsibility in terms of, a proper coach-athlete relationship that allows you to develop a sense of responsibility around getting better at the game. That it's about me, I don't blame anybody else. This is me. I have to hold up my end of the bargain, and getting better, in other words, learning to improve, takes a fair level of responsibility. And the last piece then, within the environment or within the player, again, he's playing a team sport, so he has to learn that it's more than just about himself. He has to support others. So they're the 6, for me, key attributes that we need to develop. Then in terms of the environment, go on, you're fine. In terms of the environment, what I'd like to see happening is, I suppose, a commonality of approach, a common language, absolute, high-end communication between the main players. That is coaches, teachers, parents, administrators especially. I have the word here now, coach developers, which is probably a new word for GAA, but hopefully it's something that will be adopted. And the last piece then is the GAA system. So if I were to explain that, obviously coaches, we all understand, and the role of coach in terms of player development is the most crucial. Teachers, obviously support role sometimes, other times a front role. Parents, a varying role from the age of 0 all the way to whenever you retire. Administrators have a key role, and sometimes my experience is that they actually have too much to do and are too busy to actually get their head around what player development actually is. So there needs to be an education element there. Coach developers, these are the people who actually coach the coaches. And I think in the GAA up to now, we've had tutors who have done a marvelous job. I think there's going to be need in time for every club to have a coach developer. And I think the GAA will be smart about that. And they'll obviously tie back into the county system in terms of the GDAs and the county games manager. But I think I can see going down the line, coach developers in clubs promoting best practice, linking back in with the county, sitting on communities of practice within the county and working with their own coaches in their own club. And the last piece then is the GAA system. So that goes back to the games program, it goes back to the governance, who's in charge here, and it goes back to leadership, basically. So unless the GAA leads properly, unless the GAA, and I talk about Croke Park now especially, grabs the bulls by the horns here, we'll continue to have all the issues that we've spoken about so far.
And I suppose with all those things, Brian, like they're actually cyclical. Like if any one of them parts falls out, it can be very easy for people to point a finger of, that's what's wrong and that's what's wrong. Like, we can go here and think of what people said to both of us probably in the last 6 months about problems with coaches, problems with teachers, problems with parents, problems with administrators, with coach developers, with Croke Park, who get the most knocking. But they all have to be a part of the process, like, don't they?
100%, Colin. It doesn't work otherwise. You can't have a brilliant coach education model, nuanced and bespoke, and the coach is getting the best of treatment in terms of education, and we're forgetting about everybody else. Like, for me, one of the most crucial components of development is the car journey home from a match or training session where the young fella's in the back or the front, and the parent dissects his performance and speaks in a different language to maybe the coach. And I think, there's a huge element of education there. And sometimes we bring parents together and we talk about nutrition and we talk about membership and insurance. We're underselling their role. And I actually remember being in one county where I was actually watching a session indoors, and they had a lovely, lovely setup, massive high performance area. And I got a picture of looking up from the gym floor up to a window up high to a parent who was sitting on a seat reading a book. So that person's job was to get the child to the training session and bring him home and feed him.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you're only at training an hour and a half maximum a day, you know, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 days a week. The parents are with them 24/7, and we have a huge job of work there in terms of educating parents. Also, Colin, I think teachers feel alienated, to be honest. I think, you know, despite many, many, many good practice in many, many of the counties, and, you know, I would say second level teachers at times, they feel like that they're on their own. They feel like that they're running a team on their own. They might have to run 3 or 4 teams in the school. There might only be 1 or 2 teachers interested in GA. And sometimes I just feel that they're alienated a bit and they're not part of the process. Now, some would argue that some teachers don't want to be part of the GA process. I'm not sure about that. I think, you know, people have to be brought in. And again, there has to be education for teachers around what this type of development would look like.
Yeah, and like, you know, just on the teacher's point of view, I suppose at post-primary, more so than primary, but like we'd see it that, like you mentioned, there might be one teacher looking after 3 or 4 teams. They mightn't be left out to play challenge games. They might be struggle to get to be allowed go on bus journeys away. And like, I suppose with the best will in the world, if the administrators want to put in a plan that doesn't take into account the feedback of the teachers, not just in the big schools, because as I said, we can all think of the Middleton CBSs and the St. Coleman's and the Christians, who are ultra supportive. They'll put every support there for the teachers, but other schools just don't have those supports, be it just having even a sub teacher to cover while that teacher is gone. The logistics that me on the outside looking in wouldn't actually be conscious of. So it is important that we bring the teachers on board as part of the planning processes for all these things.
Yeah, and imagine having a situation where teachers, club coaches, or even, you know, very talented players, county coaches, where the 3 of them are in a communication loop talking about the player. That's alien to us. Yeah. So what I'm suggesting is that that's where we need to get to. Teachers are very much part of this process, and they very much see the holistic side of things. I'm not just saying because I'm a teacher myself, but that's their bread and butter. So I think they have a crucial role to play, but I think above all, we need to provide better for our coaches. I think we need to provide better for our coaches. And I think the GAA has a massive job of work in terms of provision of a new way of educating coaches and a new way of creating learning environments where coaches will actually improve. And I think that's where we need to get to.
And like, just from our own perspective, we'd find that as a huge challenge. That like I'd always say that you might have a coach, and especially in the city clubs and the big town clubs, where people might be, let's say, like, you know, they might be dragged over the fence and will you help out with this team? They mightn't have a GA background, but they're very, very willing to learn. And they might spend a huge amount of time themselves. But we also, on the opposite end of it, then we'd have a lot of coaches who might have played themselves up and recently, who might be looking and going, sure, what's that person going to teach me about it? Like, how would we break down the barrier to that person? Or like, is there any question on that?
I think that comes back to the GA system, right? Okay. So in terms of coach education, I think for the novice coach, they need their hand held and they need a lot of formal education, right? For the guy who's played or the girl who's played for 25 years and they know the game inside out, they might have to do some level of formal education to actually qualify to be a coach in the GA, obviously, ethics, guard clearance, etc. But they actually need contextually based education. In other words, they need, if they're working at F1 or F2 or F3 or in the T space, they need education that's actually pertinent to that space. So they don't need a general approach to how we play the game and the X's and O's. They need an approach that focuses in on how we deal with players at this level where they're working at right now. And that's where it becomes valuable. So if it's generic and it's just another course, it doesn't suit people. It won't work. What people need is they need learning about what they're doing now. And as they progress through the T space, say, or even the F space, as they progress through that, the GA needs to provide various levels of continuous education and development for coaches to actually get better. I think there's nobody doesn't want to get better at coaching. We all want to get better at coaching. Yeah. I think we've done a poor job in actually providing, and it's nobody's fault. Yeah. It's just the way it's after working out. We haven't done enough in actually providing for coaches.
It's a really, really good point. I'll pick your brains on that another time.
Yeah.
The game?
Yeah, again, these principles are all over research in terms of, you could borrow them from any sport who've done any level of player development in terms of a framework. I think probably people will see them if they are knowledgeable about the Thurles program in Leinster. Some of these are kind of like those. So if we take our sessions, and if we can look back at the session and we can see it has all these 6 elements in it, then we know we've done a good session. So it's game based. It looks like the game. Fun is a key component. Players are constantly making decisions. All the players involved, so there's no bus queues as they call them. There's nobody waiting behind cones. It's, sometimes they say if the session resembles chaos, it's actually a better session for learning. It's player centered, so it's individualistic. And the last one there, I don't know, it's in the way. I'm in the way of it, so
testing
I can't say
and challenging.
And testing and challenging, yeah. So the key there is that players need to be stretched every time they come to you. You need to push them to the level where they're going to stretch and stretch and stretch. And that goes back to an earlier point of sometimes moving players into a different environment where older players or better players they might have to come up against them. So if you have those 6 elements working, actually, again, I refer to GB hockey, they actually call this the golden thread. So every single session they have, this golden thread is intertwined in between all of the activities. So it's not always about just playing a game. It's not about just throwing out the ball and say, we're going to play a game today. Everything has to be thought out properly. Everything has to be, a problem that you saw last week in the game, no matter what level it is, and inventing games and being creative to actually deal with that problem the following week in your training sessions. So I suppose the way I look at the game is probably a game sense approach is where I'm at. Mm-hmm. Is that I'd always try and start training with, even with small players, I wouldn't really warm up. Maybe some people argue against that, but I haven't seen the science to tell me that I really need to spend 20 minutes warming up 12-year-olds. I don't. 4 or 5 minutes is plenty. But I'd always start with a big game where it's a game with where I don't actually interject at all, to just play. And then that problem that we want to work on, we might work on it in a small game sense for maybe 2 or 3 different games that we might invent or create, or we might borrow them from somewhere. And then we might go into a skill part of that in terms of a drill, working on the problem. And then we go back into the big game where we're now working on the problem, and we're actually going to players individually with feedback afterwards saying, in the first game, you did X. Because of the small games and the drill, you did Y in the big game, and that's what I like to see you doing, and you're very good at doing it, or whatever way you want to phrase it. So that kind of an approach has all those elements within it. Now, there are other ways of doing it, and people have their own ways of doing it, but I have found that to be effective. And when you add it to proper questioning and proper feedback and reflection yourself, I think it's a very powerful way of actually coaching.
And you mentioned drill there. Like, I know game space, there's look, the research is out there. We don't need to have that discussion. But I suppose it's something we've mentioned in previous webinars, is that it doesn't have to be 100% game based, and it doesn't have to be 100% drill based. And probably going by age, when you're starting at a younger age, it might be a small bit lighter grey and darker grey. But there's a grey area in the middle that you need to find out to work your group. Would that be?
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. We're not completely excluding one over the other.
No, you can't. What you have to do is, whatever. For me, it's whatever's right for your group of players, right? So that doesn't, you could have a group of players who technically might need very little input, but from understanding the game point of view, might need huge game input. So you might have a less of an approach in terms of trying to develop the techniques and the skills, and a huge input into developing when to do what, when to actually take out the gun, or take out the sword, or whatever it is, the weapon that they have. Yeah. So I think that's contextually based again. But I wouldn't run away from drills, but I would be very, very, very sure of why I'm using it.
Yeah, and I suppose with younger kids, there's ways of doing games as a replacement for a lot of drills. That, as I said, when we say games, a lot of people think the 15 on 15.
For me, I wouldn't be going near.
Sorry. Yeah. Hello.
You hear me, Colm?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. No, I was just saying with young kids, it doesn't, for a lot of coaches, when we talk about game, they think 15 versus 15, 11 versus 11, whereas a game takes up many different guises. By just having an opponent one-on-one, you're basically making a game out of it. Like, so.
Yeah, and funny you say that. I'm actually trying to work on something at the moment for our own club, but where we'd actually go, if we take these 6 principles, right? And if we go at under 6 in the nursery, if we end up playing any type of match, the biggest the number should be is 1v1 with open goals, right? Then if you extend that to 7 or 8-year-olds, now we have 2v2. So we have a goalie and an outfield player. So 2 people have to play together versus 2 others, right? So one guy outfield against another guy. One of the biggest things, and I suppose I saw this from Belgium FA when they presented in Croke Park there. Very, very good presentation if anyone wants to watch it. But, you know, you're building up an understanding of how the game works. So 6-year-old, 1v1, 7-year-old, 2v2, 8-year-old, we can go 3v3, or we can go 4v4, 5v5, and build up to, really, if you're going to be technical about it, when they get up to under 12, or under 12, yeah, they should really only be playing 11v11 or 12v12, something like that. And 15v15, if you adopt the Belgian model, would only come in when they're under 14.
Okay.
So now that might be heresy to some people, but
yeah. No, it was something. Look, I seen that presentation as well, and like from that, we were going back to 5-a-side at under 8 this year for the start of the year, just based on what Chris van der Hagen was saying on that kind of a model of giving them opportunities. F1, Foundation 1.
Yeah, what I've done now is very quickly I'll go through this because I don't want to bore anybody, but it's just if you take that approach that we spoke about from the player, the environment, and the game, what should it look like at F1 stage, right? So the focus at F1 obviously is, and this is within the GAA already, focus on developing fundamental movement skills. So I'm not a fundamental movements expert, but there's loads of people out there who are, and I would like to think that GAA will borrow their expertise, and you know, some of the practice we have already are quite good. Some of the resources are quite good, I would say, on GAA Learning. But we just need to look at them again and say, okay, is this what we really want? So if the outcome is that the child at this stage will have developed a range of fundamental movement skills that will actually allow him then to develop specific skills for football and hurling, then that is the goal of this stage, right? So you're talking club nursery. And I suppose there's another element to this too, Colin. If somebody decides that hurling and football isn't for them at the end of this stage, right? And if they go through the stage for 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is, 4 until 7, and they go away and do something else, or they go away and not play sport at all, at least you've given them the fundamental movement skills to actually be active for their whole lives.
Yeah.
So whether it's riding bicycles, whether it's out jogging, whether it's, you know, surfing, whatever it is, that the GAA has played a part there. Now, obviously, what we want to do is keep people in the GAA for as long as we can. So the idea is, the focus here is on the movement skills, fundamental movement skills. So what it will look like if you go on to the next slide. So if you take down the left-hand column there, in terms of the player, right, those player attributes. So we spoke about learning to love the game, learning to commit, learning to improve, learning to become resilient, take responsibility, and supporting others. And then what I've done is just a descriptor of what that could look like and what you're working on. So in the eyes of the child, what he'd be working on and what we might see you do, okay? So if I just take one, okay, if I take learning to become resilient, right? So I'm saying, keep going even when I'm finding it very difficult is the description. So I'm 5 years of age, right? Then what I'm working on is I'm not giving up even when my friends are able to do the activity before I can, or sometimes even better than I can, right? And the last piece then is what we might see you do. Initially, we might see you get upset, but from encouragement from my coach and a bit of advice, I'll keep doing what he's asking me to do, and eventually I will actually master what the skill is, right? So this is a very different approach than saying the child needs to be able to kick the ball, off the wall and catch it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
we're heading in a totally different direction. It's not even giving you the guide of what you need to do, but it's actually giving you the guide of what you need to make the child feel, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
All right. So that's just from a player's perspective. That's one. If I go down to the environment, and if I take the role of, just say if I take the coach developer, right? So we spoke about this person earlier on. So their role description at F1 stage is to support nursery coaches through initial formal education pathways, but more importantly, in creating regional communities of practice, workshops, and online learning opportunities for coaches working at the F1 stage. Now imagine, Colm, that you're, after being pulled over the fence, as you called it, into the F1 group. There are 5 and 6 year olds. There's 25 of them there. Where do I go for help? besides running away, imagine if you had a situation where in the club you have a coach developer holding your hand, right? Imagine also being able to go to a regional community of practice where there's people the exact same as you talking about, maybe once every fortnight or once a month, talking about their issues in terms of coaching and trying to work out solutions. Imagine going to workshops just purely based on nursery opportunities. I know some of them exist already. And imagine then being able to go online every single night you want to grab resources to support your practice. That's what we're talking. And then, I said, supported by new opportunities developed for, I don't know, I can't see again. You might be able to see that there.
Tutors taking all six stakeholders and new modes of learning into account.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the environment. And then the final piece, the game. And if I look about, just take one, constant decision making. Okay. So players continuously make decisions while playing games or attempting movements. Children must be provided with constant opportunities to make decisions.
Within the coaching session, towards the very end of this phase, the coach may begin to ask children how they come to the decisions they came to.
Exactly. So again, it's very, very different to what's gone before. And I hope people can see that, go back to the framework, that's the skeleton, that's where our journey map is. These are the pieces of the journey map around player, game, and environment. And I suppose coach education then needs to flesh these pieces out to provide people with resources and experiences and learnings around each of the areas. If you move on to the next one there. Basically, I'm saying, the game is a teacher, the pitch is a classroom, the coach is facilitator, and that's the key piece. But it must be about improving the quality of interactions between the player, the coach, and their, I can't see it.
The coach and their context, that's all.
And their context, yeah, where you're coaching. So what I tried to present, Colm, I don't know, is it confusing people, but it's a different approach to what we have at the moment. And I'd love to know if it is confusing or not. I'm not sure.
No, look, I think, like as the information, a lot of the things you're saying are probably a lot of the information that people are probably hearing more so in the last couple of years, about being player centered. Yeah. And I suppose, we're not just not winning at all costs, and there's more to it. Like, so it's something, but it's great to see it actually in a structure like that, as I said, with the 6 pillars of with the 3 phases you have there outlined. Yeah. So it really does put a bit of structure to what people are hearing. Because like
basically, yeah, sorry, what you're talking about is 6 attributes, 6 people involved in the environment, and 6 pillars in the game. That's it. 6, 6, and 6. So if we measure ourselves against those 6 all the time, it becomes very, very straightforward.
Mm-hmm. So look, I just got 2 or 3 comments in here. One is from Tom, just on about regarding specialization and encouraging kids to play multi-sport, that it can be understood that a kid needs to play a variety of sports at a good level, whereas in reality, this can lead to overload of work on a child. It is appropriate to play different sports at a casual level. So e.g. basketball on the road with friends and stuff like that, casual soccer in the yard. It doesn't all have to be structured,
no.
The multi-specialization. Same for Tom again, I think it is important. Is it important to win, or for players to be valued, empowered and involved and enjoying themselves? What age does that change? I suppose would be my question, because I know that, look, we're very much player centric and stuff like that, and like you mentioned already, the weaker player who might get the same it might be due game time that he gets, but like, does winning? I suppose, like, you've been through it an awful lot now, so it's easy for you to say, and it's easy for me to say that, is winning actually the most important part? And it's, I suppose, from our perspective, it's not. But for a coach out there now, let's say, who might be, I won't say novice, but he might be going through 5 or 6 years of this now, starting at under 6s, and he's up to under 12, 13, 14 now. And how do we break down the barrier? How do we, I won't say enlighten, because everybody has their opinion on it, but what can we say to those type of coaches? They're going, okay, lads, we need to start winning. Like, we can't be taking off 5 fellas at halftime every game, 5 or better players, and losing the game by 3 points every week. Like,
yeah, I'll tell you a quick story on that one. All right, I remember speaking to Billy Morgan about maybe 10 years ago now, just on that in Nemo. And I know they're headed up as a, kind of a as an exemplar to
star
all of us.
Pupil, yeah.
But he told me that, and I think they're very, very fortunate to have people like Billy and Frank Hogan and others, Danielle and all these people who have set the tone in the club, right? So there was somebody running an underage team who, you know, who probably wasn't used to the Nemo way. I think it was probably under 14. So at half time, you know, I think he probably under duress maybe from some selectors, he took off 4 or 5 players in a league game out in Trebeck one night. Billy happened to be at the game, and they were winning by, I'd say, 3 or 4 goals at half time. The other team came back into the game when these stronger players went off, and they got ahead maybe by a point, 2 points. Billy said he looked down to the line, and the manager was getting the good players ready again to go back on to win the game. So I suppose, you know, Billy said that he had to interject, and he went down and he said to the guy, whoever his name was, he said, look, you know, you're not going to put on those players. That's not what we do here. And they lost the game, and everyone went home, and everyone was grand. Everyone played half a game.
Yeah.
And I suppose having that end in mind piece in your head, what do you want to do? Do you want to try and win competitions early? Or do you want to have a strong club who by minor are very organised, very together, really know what they're about, and can produce minor and under 20 teams that are competitive, and eventually have a lot of players to play on your senior team, your intermediate team, your junior team. I think I go with the latter every day of the week. Anyway.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, as you mentioned, there's a lot of really strong characters that would be I suppose, backing up that theory.
Yeah.
Within things. So I suppose.
We talk about culture, Colin. Like,
yeah,
culture happens over time, and if the culture is weak in any way, shape, or form, then people can do what they want. If the culture is strong, then the culture dictates what actually people will do. I think the drive for all of us is to be involved in clubs where the culture is very, very, very overt, and it's very, very, very clear to everybody that this is what we do around here. And I think when you get to that stage, this development stuff becomes a bit easier.
Yeah. As I said, like it's we'd always say, well, I'd always say that I'd find that when a coach comes around a second time, he's a lot more amenable to what you're talking about tonight. That the first time it's like a child, as I said, and we have to realize that with coaches as well, we can be very critical of them. But for a coach who's under his first year of coaching, it's like a child starting out for the first year. We don't give out to that child for making mistakes, but yet we kind of hold coaches to a higher standard. A lot of the time, no, I know they should be adults and they should be able to think, but we have to be conscious that they develop themselves over years as well. So we got to be conscious of that. Just a couple of things. Does this break offer us an opportunity to reset, redefine our goals and objectives to build people for sport for life? Like, look, we're down for another 3 months anyway. And it's great, like the amount of access to webinars and podcasts and stuff out there now is top class. But like for coaches, like it is really a chance that they can, I suppose, do something they've never done before. And especially coaches that have maybe gone through a couple of years of it now, where they're probably flat out in playing season now, and come October, they're drained. They don't want anything to do with it for a couple of months, and then they come back in ready to go again in January and do the coaching courses and whatnot and go back in. But how else could we, I suppose, challenge coaches or give them other areas that we could target?
I think one of the biggest things, well, firstly, I think this downtime, call it whatever you want to, I think the GAA need to use it smartly. And I think they need to be very clever in terms of, you know, even if we have after the 20th of July some form of season, it's going to be a very short season. So really it's next year, 2021, if they're rolling out a new approach, it needs to be ready by then. So I think they need to be clever here in this window. In terms of the individual coach, I think, look, you're always learning, but I think the biggest thing that for me anyway is to actually examine why you are actually doing this. Why are you coaching? You know, why do you want to coach? You know, what are you getting out of it, and who is it for? You know, there's a huge part of it is for yourself, obviously, but there's another part of it about giving of yourself to something. And I suppose again, I don't want to sound, you know, a bit airy fairy, but for me, the crucial part here is a facilitation piece, and actually examining, you know, again, this word philosophy, like examine why you're doing this. You know, what are you actually trying to do? Are you trying to win this competition whenever it takes place? Are you trying to actually do something bigger than that? And I think that the getting to that bigger piece is difficult for most of us. And it will happen at some stage for all of us if you stay in the game long enough, I think.
Yeah.
And probably that's why you say, Colm, the second time round, like, you can't buy experience, but the experiences I've had, which are many, many good ones, some not so good ones, but the experience that I've had is that there's another way. There's another way of doing this, and and it's not an excuse, or it's not a cop out. I see another way of doing it.
Yeah, like, and I suppose just on that, like, there'd be, if you judge yourself as successful by what happens on the pitch, there's going to be 95% of the coaches every year are going to be very disappointed in themselves. Whereas if you, as you were saying, there's another way of suppose measuring yourself and what you actually do and what you bring to the cause. Right, last question for you. Once Gavin, I'll come back to Gavin's one. Donal, how far away from this model are Croke Park, as in providing this type of a model? So is it something, I know you spoke about now that you've put a large part of this, is it something Croke Park might be aligned to, or we might just have to take it on board as Cork from coaching game side of things? Or is there a push towards this kind of a change?
I think if you look at coach education in general, there's a push towards change like this, right? I think if you look at coaching, coaching is moving into, there's a big piece coming. Some of people online might have read a lot about constraints-led approach. If you talk about, a type of coaching approach, I think there's huge change coming across the world in terms of coaching children, especially in coaching youths. I think the GAA would be not slow about following what's out there and creating and GAA-ifying it, as we call it, and creating a new way of doing things. But I suppose for me, I'd love to see, is there appetite for this type of change? Like the people on this call tonight, is this what people want, or is this too far over to the right? I think if you have that dial that's moving, if it's way over there, it's not going to sit. But is it what people want, and is it in the middle? I'm not sure.
Okay. Last one, or it's not a question for you, I'll just address this. Gavin is just wondering about doing an Award 1 course. Gavin, they're doing foundation courses currently on Monday nights, so we'll hopefully follow up with Award 1 courses after that, but I'll talk to Shane Supple on that. Brian, I just want to say thanks very much for your time. Really, really enlightening. So what I'll do is I'll make a podcast video, and I'll PDF the files and throw them up online for people, if that's okay with you. And other than that, I just want to say thanks very much for sharing. It was really, I suppose, different perspective on things from what a coaching course for people is going out and show me a few drills and stuff. So this is it's a very, very interesting topic. So thanks very much for your time. If anyone wants to contact you, do you want to throw up an email address or Twitter handle or something?
Yeah, you can contact me on Twitter if you want to. I don't know what is it, Cuthbert at Brian, or at Brian Cuthbert, I think.
I'll tag you in one of the tweets later on, yeah.
Looking for everybody. Our email is fine too, Cuthbert-Brian@hotmail.com. So anybody can send me an email if I can help anybody in any way. There's loads of people who've helped me over the years, so that's what the GAA does. We help each other.
Very good. Lovely stuff. Brian, thanks very much. Thanks very much, everybody. We've Tom Coleman in next week talking about sleep and recovery. He's worked with Conor McGregor with all the rugby teams in Ireland. We got Stephen B in 2 weeks after that, and we'll have Jor O'Regan in the middle of the two of them. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon.